What should have been a routine flight from Atlanta to Los Angeles quickly spiraled into an unexpected and highly publicized incident, leaving passengers stunned and sparking a national conversation. It all began when Simone Caldwell, a rising basketball star known for her skill and humility, found herself at the center of an uncomfortable confrontation just minutes after boarding. Simone, 23, was making waves in the sports world with her phenomenal talent. A quiet and reserved personality, she preferred to let her game speak for itself rather than seeking attention off the court. That day, dressed casually in a gray hoodie, sneakers, and a pair of joggers, her long box braids cascading down her back, she blended seamlessly into the crowd at the bustling Jacksonville International Airport. She was looking forward to the flight, one of many she had taken in her burgeoning career, as an opportunity to enjoy some peace and quiet. Simone had carefully selected a window seat, 14A, weeks in advance. She had her book ready and her earbuds tucked neatly into her pocket. This was supposed to be an uneventful trip. After checking in and passing through the crowded security lines, Simone boarded the plane with a polite nod to the flight attendants. As she navigated the narrow aisle, she glanced at her ticket one last time to ensure she was heading to the correct seat. Finding 14A, she placed her carry-on bag in the overhead compartment and settled in. As the engines hummed in preparation for takeoff, Simone gazed out the window at the activity on the tarmac. She leaned back, popped in her earbuds, and let out a contented sigh, grateful for a rare moment of solitude amid her hectic schedule. The cabin filled with the chatter of families, solo travelers, and flight attendants giving safety instructions. Moments later, the tone shifted. A flight attendant, Lila Henderson, approached Simone with a stern expression, her presence immediately drawing attention from nearby passengers. "Excuse me, miss," Lila said sharply, her voice carrying an edge that was hard to ignore. "You're in the wrong seat." Simone removed one earbud, her calm demeanor replaced by confusion. She double-checked the ticket she had kept in her hoodie pocket. "This is 14A, right?" she asked, holding up her boarding pass for verification. "Yes," Lila replied, her tone curt, "but I need you to move to a seat a few rows back, now." Passengers in nearby seats began to glance over, their curiosity piqued. Simone frowned slightly, the situation feeling strange. "I'm sorry, but this is the seat I reserved. Is there a reason I'm being asked to move?" Her voice was firm but respectful. Lila crossed her arms, her impatience clearly mounting. "It's a simple request," she snapped. "Just move to the other seat so we can proceed." Simone sat straighter in her seat, her brows furrowing. "I don't mean to be difficult, but this is the seat I paid for. Unless there's a valid reason, I'd prefer to stay here." The tension was palpable. Heads turned as whispers began to ripple through the cabin. Some passengers exchanged puzzled glances, while others murmured their disapproval of the flight attendant's tone. Lila's expression hardened further. "Miss, I'm asking you one last time. Cooperate, or I'll have to escalate this situation." Simone felt her stomach tighten. Something about the interaction felt off, and the lack of explanation only deepened her discomfort. She had flown countless times before for games and tournaments, but nothing like this had ever happened. Passengers nearby began to whisper louder, the murmur spreading across rows. "She's not even doing anything wrong," one person muttered. "What's the problem?" asked another. Simone, still seated, met Lila's gaze calmly but resolutely. "This is my seat. If there's an emergency or a specific reason I need to move, I'd be happy to cooperate. But without an explanation, I don't think it's fair to ask me to give up my seat." As the uncomfortable confrontation continued, Simone Caldwell sat tensely in seat 14A, trying to make sense of the situation. The flight attendant, Lila Henderson, had stormed off moments ago, leaving Simone in a state of uneasy anticipation. She glanced around, hoping to catch the eye of another crew member who might clarify the situation. But none of them seemed to notice. Or perhaps they were deliberately avoiding the escalating scene. It was becoming clear that Simone was on her own. "This is my seat," Simone said firmly when Lila returned, her voice steady despite the mounting tension. "Unless there's an emergency or a specific reason, I don't believe I need to move." Lila's lips pressed into a thin, unyielding line, her patience visibly fraying. "If you don't comply," she warned, her tone cold, "I'll have to escalate this further." The words hung in the air like a threat, causing Simone's pulse to quicken. She took a deep breath, determined to remain calm. She didn't want to cause a scene, but she couldn't ignore the blatant unfairness of the situation. Why was her simple request to stay in the seat she had reserved being met with such hostility? The once routine atmosphere of the cabin had shifted dramatically. What had been a lively hum of pre-flight activity now grew eerily quiet as the tension spread like wildfire. Passengers were openly watching now, their initial curiosity turning to concern. Simone could feel the weight of their stares, the whispers growing louder as they discussed the bizarre altercation. "This is my seat," Simone repeated, her voice unwavering. "I'm not trying to create trouble, but I don't see any valid reason to move." For a brief moment, silence fell over the cabin. Then Lila exhaled sharply, her frustration clear. Without another word, she turned and walked briskly down the aisle. Simone stared after her, unsure of what would happen next, but certain of one thing: this flight was far from routine now. Simone glanced out the window, trying to steady her nerves. Outside, the ground crew bustled around the plane, their activity oblivious to the storm brewing inside. Her mind raced as she replayed the interaction in her head, searching for clues as to why this was happening. What had she done to provoke this? Suddenly, a troubling thought struck her. Was this about more than just a seating misunderstanding? She had worked tirelessly for years to be known for her skills and character, not the color of her skin. Yet, in the confined space of this airplane, she couldn't shake the feeling of being singled out in a way she couldn't ignore. Moments later, Lila returned, this time with a colleague in tow. The second crew member, a young man with a name badge reading Ethan Sharp, followed closely behind, his expression hesitant. Lila's demeanor, however, had changed completely. She now carried herself with a steely resolve, standing just a few feet from Simone. "Ma'am," Lila said with an air of finality, "we've asked you politely to move. If you don't comply, we will have to take further action." Simone straightened in her seat, her composure intact. "I'm happy to follow any reasonable request," she replied evenly, her voice clear and steady. "But I still don't understand why I'm being asked to move when this is the seat I was assigned." Lila's jaw tightened, her frustration mounting. Beside her, Ethan shifted uncomfortably, glancing between the two women. He looked as though he wasn't sure whether to step in or let Lila take the lead. "Ma'am, this is your last warning," Lila said, her voice colder now. "If you refuse to cooperate, I'll have to involve airport security." The threat sent a ripple of gasps through the cabin. Passengers exchanged worried glances, their murmurs growing louder. "She's literally sitting in her assigned seat," a woman nearby whispered, her voice carrying through the cabin. "This is ridiculous," muttered a man a few rows back, shaking his head in disbelief. Simone felt a pang of gratitude for their support, though she knew it might not be enough to defuse the situation. Something told her this ordeal was far from over. Taking a deep breath, she steadied herself. "I'm not trying to cause a problem," she said, her tone firm but respectful. "I just want to understand why this is happening." Lila turned to Ethan and whispered something inaudible. He hesitated for a moment, then gave a reluctant nod and walked briskly toward the front of the plane. Moments later, the cabin door opened, and two uniformed airport security officers stepped on board. As the two uniformed security officers approached Simone Caldwell, her chest tightened and her breathing grew shallow. Their neutral expressions, almost mechanical, hinted at a routine they had clearly gone through many times before. But for Simone, this was anything but routine. Standing nearby, Lila Henderson quickly filled them in, her tone clipped and impersonal. "The passenger is refusing to comply with the crew's instructions," she said, her gaze landing pointedly on Simone. "We need her removed from the aircraft." Simone's heart sank as she looked from the officers to Lila, struggling to keep her voice steady. "I'm not refusing to comply," she said carefully, her emotions threatening to bubble over. "I just want to know why I'm being asked to leave my seat." One of the officers, a stocky man with a no-nonsense demeanor, stepped forward. His voice was calm but firm. "Ma'am, our job is to ensure a smooth boarding process. Please gather your belongings and come with us." The phrasing may have been polite, but the undertone left no room for negotiation. Simone's hands trembled as she reached for her carry-on bag in the overhead compartment. The weight of the moment pressed down on her, far heavier than the duffel bag she carried. As she stepped into the aisle, her gaze met those of the other passengers, who were now openly watching. Their faces reflected shock, disbelief, and among some, silent anger. "Why are you doing this to her?" a man called out, his voice tinged with indignation. "This doesn't make any sense," added a woman from a few rows back, shaking her head in frustration. Lila's head snapped toward the crowd, her professionalism slipping further as she shot a warning look. "This is a matter of safety," she snapped, though her tone was anything but convincing. Simone clenched her jaw, determined to handle the situation with dignity. She nodded silently to the officers and began the slow walk down the aisle toward the exit. Whispers followed her like an unwelcome shadow. She didn't even do anything. This is so wrong. While the murmurs of support offered some comfort, they did little to ease the sting of humiliation. Simone's face burned as she stepped off the plane and onto the jet bridge, flanked by the officers. The cold, sterile air of the terminal hit her like a slap, a stark contrast to the tense, stifling atmosphere of the cabin she'd just left. The officers led her to a small waiting area near the gate. One of them offered a perfunctory apology. "Sorry for the inconvenience, ma'am. Someone from the airline will speak with you shortly." Simone nodded stiffly, her mind racing. She sank into a hard plastic chair, her duffel bag at her feet. Why had this happened? What could she have done differently? Despite her best efforts to maintain her composure, frustration and confusion threatened to overwhelm her. Her phone buzzed, snapping her out of her thoughts. Instinctively, she reached for it, hoping for a distraction. What she found only deepened her disbelief. Social media was already ablaze. A fellow passenger had uploaded a video of the confrontation, and it was quickly gaining traction. Simone's name was tagged in dozens of posts, her fans and supporters rallying to her defense even before she fully understood what had transpired. One tweet read, "Unbelievable. Rising basketball star Simone Caldwell removed from her seat for no reason. This feels like blatant discrimination. Justice for Simone." Another post included the video clip with the caption, "She handled this with grace. But why was this even necessary? We need answers at Clearway Airlines." Simone stared at the screen, her emotions swirling. Gratitude for the support mixed uneasily with a growing sense of unease. This was no longer just about her, it was becoming a public spectacle. After what felt like an eternity, 2 airline staff members approached her. Their expressions were carefully neutral, their tone measured. "Miss Caldwell, we apologize for the situation." One of them said, "We'll rebook you on the next available flight." Simone blinked in disbelief. "That's it?" she asked, her voice edged with frustration. "No explanation? No accountability?" The staff member hesitated, avoiding her gaze. "We're still looking into what happened," he said. "For now, we just want to ensure you get to your destination." Simone exhaled sharply, leaning back in the uncomfortable chair. The apology felt hollow, a flimsy band-aid over a deep wound. As she waited for her new flight, the weight of the incident bore down on her. This wasn't just about a seat or a misunderstanding. It was about something much bigger, something she couldn't ignore. For the first time since the ordeal began, anger began to bubble to the surface. Simone clenched her fists, vowing silently that she wouldn't let this injustice go unnoticed. This was just the beginning. Simone's thoughts raced as she tried to piece everything together. The flight attendant's words, her abrupt removal from the plane, the stunned faces of the passengers, it all replayed in her mind like a broken record. She pulled out her phone again, scrolling through the growing flood of notifications. Messages of support poured in from friends, teammates, and strangers alike. "Simone, we're with you. This is unacceptable. Keep your head up. You didn't deserve this." But the video spreading online was already igniting a firestorm. The clip, taken from multiple angles by other passengers, showed her calm but firm demeanor as she defended her right to remain in her seat. It contrasted sharply with the escalating hostility from the flight attendant. Simone Caldwell sat in the small terminal waiting area, her mind a whirlwind of emotions. The moment she was escorted off the plane, it seemed like the entire world had taken notice. A fellow passenger, Mia Daniels, had posted a video of the incident, and it was spreading like wildfire. The video began with Simone calmly asserting her right to remain in her assigned seat, followed by the tense exchange with the flight attendant, Lila Henderson, and culminating in the arrival of airport security. Mia's caption read, "Unacceptable. A professional athlete removed from her seat without justification felt like bias to me. Justice for Simone." Simone watched the video with a mix of gratitude and unease. She was thankful someone had recognized the injustice and was willing to speak out. But the sheer scale of attention the post was garnering left her overwhelmed. Within hours, hashtags like Justice for Simone and Bias in the Air began trending across multiple platforms. Thousands of people were sharing the clip, their reactions ranging from outrage to heartbreak. The incident struck a chord, igniting a larger conversation about fairness, bias, and how authority is wielded in public spaces. Passengers who had been on the flight chimed in with their accounts, further fueling the growing firestorm. One passenger, James Liu, detailed the flight attendant's dismissive tone. It was clear to everyone she was being unfairly targeted. Simone handled it better than most of us would have. Another passenger, Nina Kim, shared what she had overheard. Someone nearby even asked why she was being singled out. It made no sense to any of us. Simone scrolled through the comments, her emotions teetering between appreciation and uneasiness. Many users were furious. This is why systemic change is needed in the airline industry. How is this still happening in 2024? She showed more grace than I ever could have in that situation. Others shared personal experiences of being discriminated against in public spaces, particularly while traveling. The responses made it clear that this was no longer just about Simone or her seat. It had become a symbol of a much larger issue. Despite the growing wave of support, Simone couldn't help but feel overwhelmed. She hadn't asked for any of this attention. Her plan for the day had been simple: board her flight, get to Los Angeles, and focus on her next big game. Now she was at the center of a national conversation about bias and justice. As notifications on her phone multiplied, Simone's agent, Renee Morgan, called. Renee was a sharp, no-nonsense professional who had been a steadfast champion of Simone's career. "Simone," Renee began, her voice filled with urgency, "I've been getting calls all morning. Sponsors, reporters, advocacy groups. Everyone wants a statement." Simone sighed, running a hand through her braids. "I don't even know what to say, Renee. I'm still trying to process what happened." Renee's tone softened. "I get it, but this is bigger than you now. People are looking to you for leadership, even if it's just a few words about how you're feeling. You don't have to have all the answers, just be honest." Simone nodded, even though Renee couldn't see her. "Let me think about it. I wasn't expecting any of this." "I know," Renee replied. "But remember, you're not alone in this. You've got a lot of people behind you." By the evening, the incident had been picked up by major news outlets. Headlines dominated social media feeds and television broadcasts. Rising basketball star removed from plane in alleged bias incident. Airline faces backlash after mistreatment of professional athlete. Television pundits debated the implications of the event. Some defended the airline's actions as procedural, while others condemned Lila Henderson's behavior as indicative of systemic bias. Simone's name was suddenly everywhere. Her face appeared on screens and in news articles, a stark contrast to the quiet humility with which she had always carried herself. For someone who had worked hard to avoid the spotlight off the court, the exposure was jarring. Yet, as she read through messages of support from athletes, public figures, and strangers, Simone began to understand how deeply the incident resonated with people. One message stood out. "Simone, you've always been a role model for so many of us. Now, more than ever, we stand with you. This isn't just your fight, it's all of ours." The next day, Clearway Airlines released a short statement calling the incident a misunderstanding and pledging to investigate. The vague language only stoked public frustration, with activists and advocacy groups demanding clearer answers and swift action. Many accused the company of trying to minimize the issue. Simone, meanwhile, felt torn. Part of her wanted to put the ordeal behind her and focus on her career, but another part of her recognized the significance of the moment. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about challenging a system that had failed her and so many others. As the sun set, Simone sat alone in her hotel room, her phone buzzing endlessly with notifications. She opened a new message from Renee. Let's craft something simple. Just speak from the heart. Simone stared at the screen for a long moment before typing. Thank you to everyone who has reached out. I'm still processing what happened, but I want to make one thing clear. No one should be treated this way. This isn't just about me, it's about ensuring respect and fairness for everyone. Justice for Simone. She hesitated, then hit post. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within minutes, her statement went viral, garnering thousands of likes, shares, and comments. While Simone still felt the weight of the incident, she also felt a growing sense of resolve. This wasn't the path she had chosen, but it was the one she was on, and she was determined to make it count. As the adrenaline of the day began to wear off, she leaned back in her seat, watching the airport bustle around her. Simone had faced challenges before. Basketball had taught her resilience, focus, and how to stand her ground. But this was different. She wasn't just fighting for a win on the court, she was standing up for dignity, justice, and the right to exist in public spaces without being questioned or diminished. For the first time since the confrontation, Simone allowed herself to feel the enormity of the moment. It was heavy, yes, but it was also a responsibility she couldn't ignore. At Clearway Airlines headquarters in Denver, chaos reigned. In the glass-paneled conference room known as the War Room, the communications team was in full crisis mode. Led by Martha Hargrove, a seasoned PR manager with a reputation for keeping her cool under pressure, the team faced an onslaught of calls from reporters, advocacy groups, and even government agencies. All right, what's the current status? Martha asked sharply, adjusting her glasses as she scanned the room. A junior team member, Ella Chang, hesitated before responding. The hashtag Justice for Simone has hit over 1 million mentions on Twitter. Videos of the incident are trending across all major platforms, and news outlets are running it on their morning shows. Martha pinched the bridge of her nose. And the sentiment? Overwhelmingly negative, Ella replied, scrolling through her tablet. Most people are siding with Simone. There's a lot of criticism about systemic issues in the airline industry, especially around bias. Martha nodded, her mind racing. The statement we released last night calling it a misunderstanding isn't cutting it. Draft a stronger response. Acknowledge the seriousness of the incident and promise a thorough investigation. We need to show empathy and accountability. This isn't just about optics. It's about doing the right thing. The team murmured their agreement and began typing furiously. Martha turned to the legal advisor seated at the end of the table, Graham Mills. Can we comment on the actions of the flight attendant, or do we need to keep it vague for now? Graham adjusted his tie. We should avoid specifics until we have more details. There's a risk of legal repercussions if we implicate her without concrete evidence. Martha frowned but nodded. Fine, keep it vague, but make sure the tone conveys genuine accountability. We can't afford to mishandle this. Meanwhile, Lila Harmon, the flight attendant at the center of the controversy, remained blissfully unaware of the storm brewing. Having completed her shift, she was insulated from the firestorm her actions had ignited. Lila focused on her usual routine, distributing drinks, answering passenger questions, and ensuring the cabin ran smoothly. But something felt different. The energy in the cabin was tense, and passengers seemed to steal glances at her more often than usual. Their expressions ranged from curiosity to judgment. As Leela walked down the aisle, she overheard snippets of whispered conversations. Isn't she the one from that video? A middle-aged man murmured to his wife. Unbelievable, the wife replied. She's just carrying on like nothing happened. Lila frowned, unsure of what they were talking about. She shook it off, chalking it up to passengers being unusually chatty. At one point, a teenager with headphones glanced up as Lila passed, then quickly looked back at his phone. He nudged the person next to him and whispered, "That's her. I saw the video." Lila's stomach tightened. What video? When she reached the galley, her colleague, Paul Sanchez, was waiting. Paul, a junior flight attendant who was usually reserved around Lila, seemed unusually tense. "Hey Lila," Paul said quietly, glancing over his shoulder. "You should probably take a look at this." He handed her his phone, and Lila's stomach dropped as she saw herself on the screen. The video captured her interaction with Simone in stark detail. Her curt tone, the escalating tension, and the moment security arrived to escort Simone off the plane. The caption didn't hold back. Flight attendant removes pro athlete from her seat without justification. Bias or bad judgment, you decide. The comments were brutal. This is exactly what's wrong with the world. How does someone like this even get hired? Lila's hands trembled as she scrolled through the footage. She had believed she was simply enforcing policy, but seeing the public reaction made her realize the situation had spiraled far beyond what she had anticipated. As she returned to her duties, the atmosphere remained heavy. Passengers avoided eye contact, and some outright ignored her when she tried to serve them. Lila's usually confident demeanor began to crumble under the weight of the judgment she now felt at every turn. Back in Denver, Martha Hargrove finalized the new statement, preparing for what would undoubtedly be a long road ahead. She knew that this was more than a PR crisis. It was a defining moment for Clearway Airlines. And for Lila Harmon, the realization was just beginning to set in. This was no longer a private misunderstanding. It was a public reckoning. Lila tried to focus on her duties, but the energy in the cabin was palpable. Passengers avoided eye contact when she offered service, some even declining to speak to her entirely. In first class, a man in a tailored suit observed her closely. Lila later learned he was Ethan Gray, a regional manager for Clearway Airlines who had boarded unexpectedly, likely in response to the growing crisis. During a routine check, Ethan waved her over. "Miss Harmon, may I have a word?" Lila nodded, her throat dry. "Of course, sir." Ethan leaned in slightly, his voice low but firm. "You're aware there's a situation involving you that's gone public, correct?" Lila's cheeks flushed. "I just found out," she admitted. "I didn't mean for this to happen. I was following procedure." Ethan raised a hand, cutting her off. "I'm not here to debate what happened. My role is to assess the situation. Just be aware. Passengers are watching you closely, and any further misstep will only make things worse." Lila nodded stiffly, her mind spinning. She had never felt so scrutinized in her entire career. By the time the plane landed, the tension in the cabin was undeniable. Passengers disembarked with quiet judgment, some openly whispering as they walked past. "I hope they do something about her," one woman murmured to her husband as they exited. Lila avoided eye contact, focusing on cleaning the galley as her colleagues wrapped up the service. But her hands shook as she organized supplies, the weight of the day pressing down on her. Jordan approached her again, his tone hesitant but supportive. "Look, Lila," he said quietly, "I don't know what's going to happen, but maybe you should talk to HR. Get ahead of this before it gets worse." Lila nodded silently, her thoughts clouded with worry. She had always prided herself on her professionalism, but now that reputation was hanging by a thread. Back at Clearway Airlines headquarters in Denver, Martha Hargrove prepared for a press conference. The new statement had been carefully crafted, designed to address public outrage while buying the company time to investigate the incident. Standing at the podium before a room full of reporters, Martha took a deep breath. "Good afternoon," she began, her voice steady but measured. "At Clearway Airlines, we take the concerns raised by this incident very seriously. Our priority is to ensure all passengers feel respected and valued. We have launched a full investigation into the matter and are committed to transparency as we address these issues." The reporters wasted no time, their hands shooting into the air. "Is the flight attendant still employed?" one asked. "Does Clearway Airlines have a policy for handling incidents like this? Is bias a systemic issue within your company?" Martha fielded each question with practiced poise, but she knew the real challenge lay ahead. The airline's handling of the incident would determine whether they could rebuild public trust. That evening, Lila sat alone in her apartment, staring blankly at her phone. The weight of the day pressed down on her like a heavy blanket. For the first time, she allowed herself to think deeply about her interaction with Simone Caldwell. Had she truly acted without bias, or had her own frustrations clouded her judgment? The questions gnawed at her, refusing to be ignored. And for the first time, Lila realized this wasn't just about policy or procedure, it was about something much bigger, something she could no longer push aside. As the night wore on, Layla grappled with the possibility that her actions, however unintentional, may have contributed to a larger systemic issue. It was a painful realization, but one she couldn't avoid. Lila Harmon woke to the relentless buzz of her phone. Its screen lit up with missed calls, notifications, and headlines that made her stomach drop. Words like incident, investigation, and viral jumped out at her. As she scrolled through the messages, her heart sank further. The name Simone Caldwell was trending across social media, alongside hashtags that criticized both her and Clearway Airlines. Her stomach churned. She had sensed the tension during the flight, especially after the confrontation, but she hadn't anticipated this level of backlash. Now her actions weren't just being questioned, they were being dissected by the entire world. An email from her supervisor confirmed her worst fears. "We need to address the situation from Flight 214 immediately. Please report to headquarters." The message was short and devoid of reassurance. Lila's usual confidence was replaced by a growing dread as she prepared for the meeting. Later that day, Lila arrived at Clearway Airlines' corporate office in Denver. She was ushered into a glass-walled conference room where her supervisor Mark Reynolds and two HR representatives, Nina Patel and Daniel Crawford, were waiting. Their serious expressions betrayed nothing, and the sterile atmosphere made Lila feel as though the walls were closing in on her. "Thank you for coming in, Lila," Mark began, gesturing for her to sit. Lila nodded, gripping her hands tightly in her lap. "Of course. I was just doing my job, but I realized things escalated more than they should have." Daniel leaned forward, his tone calm but direct. "Lila, this isn't just about escalation. It's about how the situation was handled and the broader implications. The incident involving Miss Caldwell has gone viral, and there are serious allegations of racial bias tied to your actions." The words hit Lila like a punch to the gut. "Racial bias?" she repeated, her voice filled with disbelief. "That wasn't my intention at all. I was following protocol." "Intentions aside," Nina interjected, her tone firm but measured, "perception matters. Passengers reported your tone as dismissive and your actions as unnecessarily forceful. That perception has fueled a national conversation, and it's not going away." Lila sat in stunned silence, replaying the events of the flight in her mind. She remembered Simone's calm demeanor, her boarding pass clearly displaying her assigned seat, and the mounting frustration that had led Lila to escalate the situation. At the time, Lila had convinced herself she was acting in the best interest of efficiency. But now, under the scrutiny of her supervisors and the public, she was forced to confront a more uncomfortable possibility. Had her impatience and assumptions been shaped by unconscious bias? "I didn't mean to treat her differently," Lila said quietly, her voice wavering. "I was just trying to resolve the issue quickly. But maybe I didn't think it through enough." Mark exchanged a glance with Nina and Daniel before speaking again. "Lila, this isn't the first time we've received complaints about your tone or approach with passengers. While nothing in your record suggests intentional discrimination, we've noted patterns that warrant concern." Lila's cheeks burned with embarrassment. She had always prided herself on her professionalism, yet here she was, being confronted with the possibility that her actions had caused real harm. "We're initiating a formal investigation," Nina continued. "This means reviewing passenger statements, employee testimonies, and any relevant footage from the incident. During this time, you'll be placed on administrative leave." Lila's heart sank further. "Administrative leave? Does that mean I'm being fired?" "No," Daniel assured her. "This is a chance for the company to conduct a thorough review and for you to reflect on what happened. Additionally, we're enrolling you in a mandatory cultural sensitivity training program. The goal isn't to punish you. It's to help you recognize and address any unconscious biases that may have influenced your actions." Lila swallowed hard, her throat dry. She had heard of cultural sensitivity training before, but had never considered it something she would need. Now, the weight of her mistakes felt heavier than ever. Over the following days, Lila wrestled with a storm of emotions. Defensiveness warred with shame, and an unexpected curiosity began to surface. Curiosity about the biases she had long dismissed as other people's problems. She spent hours researching topics like microaggressions and implicit bias, reading articles, and watching videos that challenged her assumptions. One story stuck with her. A first-hand account from a black woman describing how she often felt invisible in public spaces, particularly during travel. The woman's words resonated with Lila in a way she hadn't anticipated, forcing her to see her actions from a perspective she'd never considered before. Had she, in her haste and frustration, reduced Simone to just another problem to be solved? The morning after the meeting, Lila sat in her small apartment, staring out the window as the sun rose over the city. For the first time, she began to fully grasp the gravity of her actions. This wasn't just about a policy or a single flight. It was about trust, dignity, and the systemic issues that had surfaced because of her choices. She had always thought of herself as fair and unbiased, but now she realized fairness required more than good intentions. It required active effort and self-awareness. Lila opened her laptop and began jotting down her thoughts, reflecting on what she had learned so far. I didn't realize how much my actions could hurt someone, even if I didn't mean to. It's not enough to just follow the rules. I need to do better, to see people as individuals, not inconveniences. She closed the laptop, the words lingering in her mind. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. This moment could either break her or become the catalyst for meaningful change. Lila had always prided herself on her professionalism. She followed procedures meticulously and worked hard to ensure flights ran smoothly. But as she sat through her first cultural sensitivity training session, she realized how blind she had been to the unconscious biases that had influenced her actions. The stark reality was unsettling. The facilitator, Dr. Mira Shah, began the session with an icebreaker exercise. Each participant was handed a sheet of paper with a series of scenarios to consider. Lila scanned hers. You see a young mother struggling with her child. Do you offer to help? A passenger of a different ethnicity asks for assistance. How do you respond? You notice someone sitting in an upgraded seat who doesn't appear to belong. What assumptions do you make? Each question felt like a mirror, forcing Lila to confront decisions she had made without a second thought. Her interaction with Simone Caldwell during the fateful flight now loomed large in her mind, glaring evidence of her shortcomings. I want everyone to be honest, Dr. Shah said, her tone gentle yet firm. This isn't about judgment, it's about growth. Lila hesitated before writing her answers. She thought back to the impatience she'd felt when she approached Simone, the curt tone she had used, and how quickly she had escalated the situation. At the time, she had convinced herself she was simply following protocol. But now she couldn't ignore the role her own biases had played. As the session continued, the group delved into the concept of microaggressions, subtle, often unintentional behaviors that convey bias or discrimination. A video played on the screen depicting scenarios in which passengers were treated differently based on their appearance. Lila felt a lump in her throat as one scene mirrored her own actions on the flight. Perception matters as much as intention, Dr. Shah explained. Even if you don't mean harm, your actions can still have a profound impact on others. Lila thought about Simone. Despite remaining calm throughout the incident, Simone had been treated as a problem to be solved rather than a person to be respected. The realization hit Lila like a wave. She had failed to see Simone as a person, and that failure had caused harm. That evening, Lila sat alone in her apartment, replaying the training session in her mind. For the first time, she allowed herself to truly reflect on her career. Over nearly a decade at Clearway Airlines, she had interacted with countless passengers. Had she been impatient with others who didn't fit her preconceived notions of who belonged? Memories surfaced unbidden. An elderly man had once asked for assistance, but she had brushed him off, assuming he was fine on his own. A teenager in baggy clothes had caught her attention, and she had watched him more closely than necessary, suspecting trouble. A pang of guilt settled in her chest. Lila had never considered herself biased, but now she realized her actions, shaped by years of unconscious assumptions, had likely hurt others in ways she hadn't intended. The second training session was even more intense. This time, participants were paired up and asked to share moments when they had felt unfairly judged or dismissed. Lila was partnered with a colleague she hadn't worked with before, a young woman named Priya Menon. Priya recounted an experience of being questioned repeatedly by a security officer during a layover, despite having all her documents in order. "He kept asking why I was traveling alone," Priya said, her voice trembling. "I felt so small, like I had to justify my existence." Lila nodded, her chest tightening. For the first time, she truly understood how her actions might have made Simone feel during the flight. When it was Lila's turn to share, she hesitated. Then, with a deep breath, she spoke. "I didn't realize how much my own biases influenced my actions until now," she admitted. "During that flight, I approached Simone Caldwell with impatience and assumptions. I escalated a situation that could have been resolved with kindness, and I can see now how much harm I caused." The room was silent for a moment. Then Priya reached out, placing a hand on Lila's arm. "Acknowledging it is the first step," she said softly. As the sessions continued, Lila began to see the world through a new lens. She read articles and watched documentaries about systemic bias in industries like aviation. She listened to stories from passengers and colleagues, absorbing their experiences with an open heart. Dr. Shah encouraged the participants to journal their reflections, and Lila made it a daily ritual. She wrote about her fears, regrets, and hopes for the future. One evening, she penned these words: "I can't change the past, but I can change how I move forward. I want to do better, not just as a flight attendant, but as a person. I want every passenger to feel valued, no matter who they are." Growth wasn't easy. Lila struggled with feelings of shame and self-doubt, but she also found moments of clarity and strength. During one session, Dr. Shah shared a quote that resonated deeply. "Growth is uncomfortable, but staying the same is worse." Lila carried those words with her, using them as a guide whenever the weight of her mistakes felt too heavy. By the end of the program, Lila felt transformed. She had confronted uncomfortable truths about herself and had taken meaningful steps toward becoming more empathetic and self-aware. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but Lila was determined to continue learning and growing. For the first time in weeks, she felt a sense of hope. That evening, as Lila left the training center, she paused outside and looked up at the sky. A plane ascended into the clouds, its engines roaring. For the first time in weeks, she felt a glimmer of hope. She couldn't change the past, but she could shape the future. The next day, Lila walked through the bustling airport terminal in Denver, her uniform freshly pressed, her demeanor noticeably different. The training she had undergone had reshaped not only how she approached her job, but also how she viewed herself and the people around her. She was no longer just a flight attendant focused on enforcing rules. She was determined to bring empathy and understanding to every interaction. That day, Lila was assigned to a cross-country flight from Portland to Miami. As she prepared for boarding, she repeated a quiet mantra to herself: "Every passenger has a story. Every interaction is an opportunity to make someone feel seen and valued." Midway through the flight, Lila walked down the aisle to check on passengers after the meal service. As she reached row 17, she noticed a middle-aged man seated in the aisle. His face was pale, and his hands trembled slightly as he clutched a small paper bag, breathing shallowly. Kneeling beside him, Lila spoke softly. "Sir, are you feeling okay? Is there anything I can do to help?" The man, whose carry-on bag bore the name Michael Grant, looked up at her with a mixture of embarrassment and discomfort. I don't do well with flying," he admitted quietly. "Turbulence always gets to me, and now I'm feeling a bit lightheaded." Lila nodded, her tone warm and reassuring. "That's completely understandable, Michael. A lot of people feel the same way. Let me grab you some water and a cool cloth. I'll stay with you until you're feeling better." As she stood to retrieve the items, she noticed a few nearby passengers watching the exchange. In the past, she might have hurried through the interaction, dismissing it as a minor inconvenience. But now, she saw it for what it was: a chance to connect, to make a small but meaningful difference in someone's day. Returning, Lila handed Michael the water and gently placed the cool cloth on his forehead. "Take slow, deep breaths," she said, her voice calm and steady. "Imagine yourself somewhere peaceful, a beach, a forest. You're safe here." Michael followed her instructions, his breathing gradually evening out. After a few moments, he gave her a small, grateful smile. "Thank you," he said. "Most people would have just handed me the water and moved on." Lila smiled back. You're welcome. If you need anything else, just press the call button. I'll be right here. As Lila returned to the galley, her colleague Jordan Reyes leaned against the counter, observing her with a curious expression. I saw what you did back there, Jordan said, his voice thoughtful. You were really patient with that guy. Lila glanced up, a touch of nervousness in her eyes. It's just part of the job, right? She replied lightly, though she knew it was more than that. Jordan crossed his arms, his gaze steady. You've always been professional, Lila, but lately, you're different. In a good way. More attentive, more compassionate. Lila hesitated, then nodded. I've been working on it. After everything that happened, I realized how important it is to really see people, not just as passengers, but as individuals. Jordan smiled. Well, it shows. Keep it up. For the first time in weeks, Lila felt a small sense of redemption. She still had a long way to go, but she was determined to continue growing. One interaction at a time. As the flight continued, Lila found herself attuned to details she might have overlooked before. In row 12, a young mother was struggling to calm her crying toddler. Lila knelt down and played peekaboo, coaxing a giggle from the child, and giving the mother a much-needed moment of relief. Near the back, an elderly couple puzzled over a customs form. Lila patiently walked them through each step, ensuring they understood it completely. When the plane hit turbulence, a first-time flyer in row 19 gripped the armrest, his knuckles white with fear. Lila sat beside him, sharing simple relaxation techniques and reassuring him until the plane leveled out. By the time the flight landed, Lila was exhausted but fulfilled. These moments of connection reminded her why she had chosen this career in the first place. She had gone beyond the standard duties of a flight attendant, finding opportunities to bring empathy and care into every interaction. As passengers disembarked, several stopped to thank Lila personally. Michael Grant was among them. His confident stride was a far cry from the pale, trembling man he'd been hours earlier. Thank you again, Lila, he said, shaking her hand firmly. You really went above and beyond. I'll never forget it. Lila felt a genuine warmth in his words, a far cry from the guarded expressions she had once encountered. After the last passenger had exited, the crew gathered in the galley for their debrief. Jordan turned to Lila, his tone appreciative. You were the heart of this flight today. Everyone noticed. Lila's cheeks flushed slightly, but she smiled. Thanks, Jordan. That means a lot coming from you. The other crew members chimed in with nods and words of agreement, and for the first time in weeks, Lila felt the camaraderie she'd feared she had lost. For so long, she had been weighed down by the fallout from her mistakes. But today, she felt a sense of redemption. That evening, Lila exited the airport, the cool night air brushing against her face. She paused for a moment, looking up at the stars. The journey to rebuild her reputation and earn back the trust of her colleagues and passengers had been challenging, but today had shown her that change was possible. Her transformation wasn't just about her career. It was about becoming the person she had always wanted to be. Each small act of kindness, each moment of patience, was a step toward that goal. As she walked to her car, she knew one thing for certain. She was on the right path. Months later, Lila found herself back in the familiar conference room at Clearway Airlines. This time, though, she wasn't a participant in cultural sensitivity training. She was the presenter. The room was filled with new recruits, their uniforms crisp, their expressions a mix of excitement and nervous anticipation. At the front of the room, a projector displayed a slide titled, Fostering Empathy in Aviation. Taking a deep breath, Lila began. Good morning, everyone, she said, her voice calm but firm. My name is Lila Harmon, and I've been with Clearway Airlines for over a decade. I'm here today to talk about something that changed my life, and I hope it will resonate with you as you begin your journey in this industry. She paused, scanning the room. A few months ago, I made a serious mistake. I let impatience and assumptions affect the way I treated a passenger. That mistake hurt not only her, but everyone watching. It sparked conversations I hadn't been ready to have, but ones that were necessary. What followed was a journey I never expected. A journey of growth, reflection, and ultimately change. The recruits listened intently as Lila recounted her story, framing it as a learning moment rather than a source of shame. She emphasized the importance of empathy, not just as a professional skill, but as a way to build trust and connection. It's not enough to just do our jobs, Lila continued. We have to see the humanity in every passenger we serve. That means listening, being patient, and understanding that even small actions can leave a lasting impact. As she spoke, Lila felt a renewed sense of purpose. What had started as a painful mistake had become a catalyst for meaningful change. Not just for her, but for the airline as a whole. Lila's journey wasn't just personal. It had become a catalyst for systemic change within Clearway Airlines. After completing her cultural sensitivity training, Lila approached the airline's leadership team with a bold proposal. Expand the training program to include every employee, from flight attendants to executives. Her pitch was direct yet powerful. We're not just investing in training, Lila told them. We're investing in trust. Trust from our passengers, our employees, and the communities we serve. If we don't act now, we risk losing far more than money. The airline's CEO, Nathan Grant, was initially skeptical. This is a significant investment, he said during their first meeting. We need to be sure it will make a measurable difference. Lila's passion and sincerity won him over. Within weeks, she was named Diversity and Inclusion Ambassador for the airline, tasked with overseeing the implementation of the expanded program. One of Lila's first initiatives was the creation of Voices in Flight, a series of open forums where employees could share their experiences and ideas for fostering inclusivity. These sessions quickly became a cornerstone of the airline's cultural transformation. During one forum, a senior pilot named Captain Eric Monroe, who had been with the airline for nearly 20 years, stood up to speak. I'll admit, I've been guilty of dismissing these conversations in the past, Eric said, his deep voice commanding attention. But listening to Lila's story and seeing the changes she's spearheaded has made me rethink my own behavior. It's time we all take a closer look at how we treat each other, not just passengers, but colleagues too. The room erupted into applause. Lila felt a surge of pride. Moments like these reminded her that the work she was doing mattered. Lila also took a hands-on approach with new recruits, mentoring them not only in the technical aspects of their roles but also in the emotional intelligence needed to excel in customer service. One day after a training session, a young flight attendant named Emily Vargas approached her. "Miss Harmon, can I ask you something?" Emily said, her voice tentative. "Of course," Lila replied, offering a warm smile. "How do you handle it when a passenger is rude or dismissive?" Emily asked. "I want to stay professional, but sometimes it's hard not to take it personally." Lila nodded, understanding the challenge. "It's not easy," she admitted, "but I've learned to pause and remind myself that everyone is carrying something we can't see. Sometimes patience and kindness are enough to diffuse tension. And when it's not, don't be afraid to ask for support from your team. We're all in this together." Emily smiled, clearly reassured. "Thank you. That really helps." Lila understood that real change required accountability. She worked closely with the airline's HR and analytics teams to track the impact of the new initiatives. Surveys revealed significant improvements. Employee satisfaction had increased. Passenger complaints about bias or dismissive behavior had decreased by nearly 40%. Employees reported feeling more supported and valued in their roles. These results not only validated Lila's efforts, but also encouraged the airline's leadership to invest further in inclusivity. Clearway Airlines began partnering with advocacy groups and industry experts to ensure their policies remained forward-thinking. The shift in culture was palpable. Colleagues who had once dismissed inclusivity as a buzzword now embraced it as a core value. Lila noticed subtle but meaningful changes across the organization. Flight attendants taking extra time to assist passengers with unique needs. Ground crew members going out of their way to greet travelers warmly. Managers prioritizing empathy in their interactions with staff. During one particularly busy flight, Lila observed a crew member help a young passenger with a disability feel comfortable and welcome. The moment brought a smile to her face. It was a clear sign that the change she had fought for was taking root. One evening, as Lila reviewed reports in her office, her phone buzzed. It was an email from Nathan Grant. "Lila, the progress we've made under your leadership has been extraordinary. Let's discuss next steps to ensure this momentum continues. Your work is setting the standard for the entire industry. Lila leaned back in her chair, a sense of accomplishment washing over her. The journey had been difficult, but it was worth every step. She thought about the future, the new recruits she would mentor, the cultural shifts she would continue to champion, and the passengers who would benefit from the changes she had helped implement. What had started as a personal reckoning had grown into a movement, one that was reshaping not just the airline but the industry as a whole. As Leela prepared for another day, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. There was still work to be done, but she was ready for the challenge. Leela Harmon stood before an attentive audience in the conference room of Clearway Airlines, finishing her speech at the mentorship program launch. "Mentorship isn't just about career advancement," Leela said, her voice filled with conviction. "It's about building connections, fostering understanding, and creating a workplace where everyone can thrive. This program is a step toward ensuring that no one feels invisible or undervalued." The applause that followed was a testament to the support Lila's vision had garnered within the company. Another key focus of Lila's work was engaging the airline's senior leadership. She firmly believed that real change had to start at the top, and was determined to ensure that executives were not only supportive of inclusivity efforts, but also actively involved in them. One memorable workshop stood out. Lila invited Dr. Clara Ho, the facilitator from her own cultural sensitivity training, to co-lead a session with the executive team. The session included role-playing exercises that highlighted challenges faced by employees and passengers from diverse backgrounds. At one point, Nathan Grant, Clearway's CEO, participated in a scenario where he had to navigate an interaction from the perspective of a passenger with limited English proficiency. "That was eye-opening," Nathan admitted afterward. "It's easy to overlook how small actions can make a big difference. Thank you for guiding us through this, Lila." Lila smiled warmly. "The key is empathy, Nathan. If we approach every interaction with understanding, we can create an experience that sets us apart, not just as an airline, but as a leader in the industry." Recognizing that Clearway's impact extended beyond its own employees and passengers, Lila also reached out to external partners. She initiated meetings with advocacy groups and community organizations to explore ways the airline could better serve diverse communities. One such partnership was with Lift Access Alliance, a nonprofit focused on making air travel more accessible for individuals with disabilities. Together, they developed training modules for flight attendants and ground staff, emphasizing the importance of empathy and proactive assistance. At a press conference announcing the partnership, Lala spoke passionately. "Our goal is to ensure that everyone who boards a Clearway flight feels welcomed, well-served, and supported," she said. "This partnership is a step toward making that vision a reality." The initiative received widespread praise, further cementing Lila's role as a changemaker within the airline. As Lila's efforts began to bear fruit, her colleagues noticed the positive impact. Employees who had once been skeptical of the changes now expressed gratitude for the tools and training she provided. During a crew meeting, Emily Vargas, the young recruit Lila had mentored, stood up to share her thoughts. "I just want to say thank you to Lila," Emily said, her voice steady but emotional. "Because of her guidance, I've learned how to connect with passengers in ways I never thought possible. She showed me what it means to lead with empathy." Lila felt her chest tighten with emotion. Moments like these reminded her why she had taken on this responsibility. As the months went on, Clearway Airlines became known not just for its service, but for its commitment to inclusivity. Passenger feedback consistently highlighted the airline's welcoming atmosphere and the attentiveness of its staff. The changes even began to influence other airlines. During an industry conference, Lila was invited to speak about Clearway's initiatives, sharing insights and best practices with leaders from competing companies. "We're not just improving our airline," Lila said during her speech. "We're setting a standard for the entire industry. Inclusivity isn't a trend. It's the future of aviation." Her words resonated deeply, sparking conversations that extended beyond the conference. Late one evening, Leela sat in her office, surrounded by reports and plans for upcoming initiatives. She took a moment to reflect on how far she had come since the day of the incident with Simone Caldwell. What had started as a painful mistake had transformed into a journey of growth, one that touched countless lives. Leila thought about Simone, the passenger whose quiet strength had been the catalyst for so much change. Making a mental note to reach out to Simone, Leila hoped to share how the experience had shaped her and to express her gratitude. As she packed up for the night, Leila felt a sense of fulfillment she hadn't known was possible. The work was far from over, but she was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The early morning sunlight poured through the glass walls of Clearway Airlines headquarters, casting long shadows across the polished floors of the atrium. Lila Harmon stood by the window, gazing out at the planes parked on the tarmac. Each aircraft symbolized a journey, a story, and a commitment to something greater than simply reaching a destination. It had been a year since the fateful flight with Simone Caldwell, the day that changed Lila's life and sparked a transformation across the company. During that time, Lila's role as the head of diversity and inclusion had evolved beyond her expectations, and the culture at Clearway Airlines had followed suit. Under Lila's leadership, the airline had become a model of inclusivity within the aviation industry. Other companies took notice of Clearway's progressive policies, from mandatory cultural sensitivity training for all employees to revamped customer service protocols designed to ensure every passenger felt seen and valued. One of Lila's signature initiatives was the Human First program. The program encouraged all employees, from ground crew to pilots, to prioritize empathy in every interaction. Through intensive training, staff were taught to recognize and challenge unconscious biases, ensuring fairness and respect were embedded into the company's operations. One of Lila's proudest moments came when Clearway Airlines was awarded the Global Aviation Inclusivity Award. This prestigious honor recognized companies demonstrating leadership in equity and inclusion. Standing on stage to accept the award alongside Nathan Grant, Leila reflected on how far they had come. "This isn't just about one company," she said during her speech. "It's about creating a ripple effect, showing the world that meaningful change is possible when we confront our biases and choose to act with compassion." The audience erupted into applause, and Lila felt a deep sense of accomplishment. Later that evening, Lila returned home, the excitement of the day still buzzing in her mind. Sitting at her kitchen table, she opened her journal, a practice that had become her solace during the tumultuous months following the incident with Simone. Flipping through the pages, she paused at an entry from the early days of her transformation. "I feel lost," the entry read. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone, but I see now that intent isn't enough. I need to take responsibility for my actions and learn how to do better." Lila smiled faintly as she remembered how raw and vulnerable she had felt at that moment. Confronting the parts of herself she hadn't realized existed had been difficult, but that self-awareness had been the catalyst for everything that followed. Her phone buzzed, pulling her out of her thoughts. It was a message from Simone Caldwell, the athlete whose resilience and grace had set everything in motion. "Hey Lila, I saw the article about the award. Congrats. It's amazing what you've done. Proud of you." Lila's chest tightened with emotion. Over the past year, she and Simone had stayed in touch, their connection a constant reminder of how one moment could lead to profound change. "Thank you, Simone," Lila replied. "Your courage started this journey. I'll always be grateful for that." The following week, Lila was invited to speak at a panel discussion on workplace inclusivity, hosted by a major aviation conference. Sharing the stage with industry leaders and human rights advocates, she recounted her journey and the lessons she had learned. "Growth comes from discomfort," Leila told the audience. "It's not easy to admit when we're wrong, but that's where transformation begins. For me, it started with listening. Really listening to the people I had overlooked or dismissed. Their stories gave me the perspective I needed to change." Another panelist, Dr. Clara Ho, who had facilitated Lila's cultural sensitivity training, nodded in agreement. "Lila's journey reminds us that leadership isn't about perfection," Dr. Ho said. "It's about accountability and the willingness to grow." Lila's story resonated far beyond the walls of Clearway Airlines. she began receiving letters from flight attendants, passengers, and even students who had read about her transformation in news articles or seen her speeches online. One letter stood out. It was from a young woman named Marisa Torres, a recent college graduate aspiring to become a flight attendant. "I used to be afraid that my background would make me a target for unfair treatment," Marisa wrote. "But seeing what you've done gives me hope. You've shown that there's room for people like me in this industry." Lila pinned Marisa's letter to the corkboard in her office, a constant reminder of why she continued to fight for change. As the months went on, Clearway Airlines' reputation for inclusivity grew stronger. The ripple effect of Lila's work was undeniable. Managers prioritized empathy in their interactions with staff. Ground crew members greeted travelers warmly, going out of their way to assist when needed. Flight attendants consistently went above and beyond to ensure every passenger felt cared for. Passengers took notice. Feedback consistently highlighted the airline's welcoming atmosphere and the attentiveness of its employees. One day, during a flight to New Orleans, a passenger stopped Lila in the aisle. "You've created something special here," the passenger said. "It feels like everyone genuinely cares. Whatever you're doing, keep it up." Lila thanked them, her heart swelling with pride. What had started as a personal reckoning had transformed into a movement. Clearway Airlines wasn't just setting new standards for the aviation industry, it was showing what was possible when empathy and inclusivity took flight. As Lila closed her journal that evening, she felt a sense of peace. The journey had been challenging, but it had also been rewarding beyond measure. The work wasn't finished, and Lila knew there would always be more to do. But for the first time, she felt confident in the future they were building, together. The reminder of Lila Harmon's commitment to change was visible in every corner of Clearway Airlines. The shift wasn't hers alone. Her colleagues, who had once been skeptical, had embraced a new culture and contributed meaningfully. Emily Vargas, the young flight attendant Lila had mentored, had grown into a standout team member known for her compassion and professionalism. During a team meeting, Emily shared her reflections with the group. "Lila taught me that small actions can have a big impact," Emily said. "Whether it's helping a nervous passenger or speaking up when I see something unfair, I know I can make a difference." Even Captain Henry Moore, a seasoned pilot who once dismissed conversations about bias, had become a vocal advocate for inclusivity. "Lila's leadership has changed the way I see my role," Captain Moore said during the meeting. "It's not just about flying planes. It's about creating an environment where everyone feels safe and respected." One afternoon, Lila boarded a flight, not as an employee, but as a passenger. She was heading to a leadership summit in Seattle, her first opportunity to experience Clearway's culture from a customer's perspective since her promotion. As she settled into her seat, she quietly observed the flight attendants interacting with passengers. Their warmth and attentiveness were unmistakable, and it brought a smile to Lila's face. It wasn't just about following procedures, they genuinely cared. The young woman seated next to Lila noticed her calm demeanor and struck up a conversation. "You seem familiar," the woman said, tilting her head curiously. "Do you work for the airline?" Lila chuckled. "I do, in a way. I'm part of the diversity and inclusion team." "That's amazing," the woman exclaimed. "I've noticed how much better Clearway feels compared to other airlines. Whatever you're doing, it's working." Lila's heart swelled with pride. "Thank you," she said simply, her voice warm. As the plane soared above the clouds, Lila reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. It had been a path marked by pain, growth, and redemption. She thought of the passengers whose stories had shaped her understanding, the colleagues who had supported her efforts, and the future employees who would inherit this new culture. The lesson that resonated most deeply with her was the power of empathy, the ability to see others not as strangers but as fellow travelers deserving of dignity and respect. Her journey had started with a mistake, but it had grown into something far greater. It was now a legacy of transformation, a living reminder that change was always possible, one small step at a time. As the plane touched down, Lila knew her work wasn't finished. There were always more flights to board, more conversations to have, and more opportunities to make the world just a little kinder. "Let's make it count," she whispered to herself, a quiet promise to continue leading with empathy and purpose. If this story resonated with you, let's continue the conversation. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. One small act of kindness could change someone's life. Together, let's keep making waves of positivity. Thank you for watching.